Pyne, number three, man. At number three, I'd like to get a studio, and then like if you've been on three times, we'll just give you your own chair, and we can go that way. So it's been a hot minute since we talked. The last time we talked, it was right before the election, and we have now moved well past that. We're 6 months in now, almost 6 months to the day of Trump taking office, and nothing slowed down. We are busier now than we were before. Um, I want to start with Iran and Israel because I feel like that this is the one that quite frankly could mushroom out the most. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But why did Israel strike Iran?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me on your show again. It's a pleasure. Israel, first of all, Netanyahu is he's a bit of a hothead. Obviously, he's invaded and bombed multiple countries in his latest tenure as prime minister, unnecessarily for the most part. Obviously, he had to respond militarily to Hamas. But with regards to his decision to bomb Iran, Israeli leaders from Bush onward, Bush to Biden, now to Trump, of course, have been pushing U.S. presidents to give them authorization and support to bomb Iran, not just to hit their nuclear sites, but to try to effect some kind of regime change, to degrade them militarily in a very serious way. And Trump is the first president who authorized it. George W. Bush, he would not give Israel the friend or foe codes they needed to bomb Iranian nuclear sites. Obviously, Obama or Biden would not either. And Trump didn't during his first term. But his first term was marked by America First statements and neocon foreign policies for the most part, with the exception of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And now, this time around, he had a very promising start. Amazing policies and measures, especially with cutting off aid to Ukraine for just 1 week, unfortunately. But that was a really bold measure. And now he's given in to his the bad advice of his deep state neocon war mongering advisors, and green lighted the Israeli bombing of Iran. I think that President Trump's decision to strike Iran was based on false pretenses. He had been sold a bill of goods by the Israelis and their agents within the U.S. government, within the Trump cabinet, that Iran was 2 weeks away from developing their first atomic weapons or nuclear weapons, and that we needed to act. I mean, we've heard the same story. I'm old enough to remember, last 20 years, we've heard that Iran is months or weeks or even days away from getting a nuke.
Dude, I
And
remember right after 9/11, George Bush came out and said they are part of the axis of evil. And back then, they were 5 years away from developing a nuclear weapon. And then I guess it's maintained at 5 years for 20 plus years until just a few weeks ago.
yeah, that really destroys their entire argument, because if they were true, if that were true, if they were that close, 20 plus years ago, they would already have a nuke.
Right.
So there's just, I mean, the chances of them being that close to a nuke, being such an evil government, anti-Israel terrorist, and not developing it are really near zero. And to any for any rational analyst to believe otherwise, I mean, come on, U.S. intelligence has been wrong about everything since Pearl Harbor, with the exception of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So why should we trust them on this either? It's just hard to imagine the cognitive dissonance that goes into this whole mindset, and if we didn't do it for that, what was the purpose? We know that Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to go for regime change in Iran, and I suspect that's probably the real reason for him being able to get Trump to attack Iran.
So, what do you think lies ahead of us now? Do you foresee more strikes? Do you see boots on the ground? What do you think? Where do we go from here?
Well, the hard thing about being a national security strategist is when you have leaders that don't have a national security strategy. Trump he actually does have a really good national security strategy with regards to Russia, for example. I mean, that's really his overriding national security strategy was, at least we were told, is that he wanted to break up the Sino-Russian alliance and establish a geostrategic partnership with Russia that would be it would be more of an economic partnership, but also to some degree a security partnership. And that's something that he gave up. Essentially, he gave that up in late April or early May and decided to pursue Biden's war. And then with regards to the Middle East, he had promised peace there as well, and he had this amazing ceasefire agreement, which was negotiated by the Biden agreement, but it never would have been accepted by the Israelis without President Trump. He was the reason we got to peace in Gaza for 2 months, and he decided to jettison it. So I guess what I'm saying is, President Trump has a national security strategy. It's supposedly a strategy of defense prioritization, where we prioritize U.S. homeland and homeland security, as well as the Western Pacific, facing China to try to deter their aggression in Taiwan. However, he hasn't followed it. He's done almost nothing to follow this bold, noble national security strategy. Instead, he's getting diverted by pursuing Biden's war, arming the Ukrainians with more and more missiles, billions more in weapons that he said he wouldn't provide. And then with the Israelis, the same thing, wasting all of these air defense missiles, interceptors, and other weapons that we need to deter Chinese aggression against Taiwan by defending Israel or encouraging them to attack Iran. So it makes it very difficult for me to predict President Trump's next move, especially when he came out and said, "Hey, I got this ceasefire," right, 2 days after he attacked them, and he said, "This is my legacy. This is what I want to be my presidential legacy." And within days, he's like, Israel says, "Yeah, we'll break it. We'll break that ceasefire." At our whim, if we think that Iran is reconstituting those nuclear sites. And Trump said, "Yeah, I might attack them as well."
Oh, that's a that's a spooky scenario. Let me ask you this question. What do you make of Trump taking Israel to the woodshed when Israel broke that ceasefire? That is the first time in my in that I can remember where an American president came that hard against Israel.
Well, it was a great day. It was a great day for America First. When he did that, it was a great day for America First when he cut off aid to Ukraine for 1 week. The problem is he's not consistent. He has these episodes of the noble America First courageous president we all voted for, that is willing to go up against the deep state and push him down and put us first. But then I think it was the next day or the day after he was basically trying to sanction Israeli courts or something like that, and trying to force them to stop prosecuting Benjamin Netanyahu for severe corruption charges, as the most corrupt prime minister in Israeli history. So, I mean, that's as pro-Israel as you get, and I still call myself pro-Israel. I've always been a supporter of the state of Israel. I am a very strong opponent of Benjamin Netanyahu because I think he's a lunatic. He's attacking and bombing every country in sight with no restraint whatsoever. He's made Israel a rogue state. Israel was once a bastion of stability in the Middle East, and now it's just creating wars left and right, and it's absolutely against U.S. national security interests.
What changed for Israel to make them go that direction? Right? That's look, and again, I'm like you. I have been traditionally, when it came to Israel, ride or die, right? I mean, it was that tight, but I'm seeing some things that they haven't done historically, which does make me raise an eyebrow. What do you have any sense of what Israel's long game is here?
Well, absolutely. Benjamin Netanyahu has made very clear he has a couple, two or three main objectives. The first of which is his Greater Israel Project, which he expressed to the president of Egypt. I think it was back in 2009, which he basically came out and said, we want to annex Gaza. We want to deport all the Palestinians to Sinai, the Sinai Peninsula. And he was offering them various uh, incentives. I think it might have included financial incentives to persuade the Egyptian president, I think it was Sisi, that to do it at the time. And they didn't agree to it. And that's essentially what he's trying to do now. And President Trump is served as an enabler for that objective in articulating his own Gaza plan, which initially was a Palestinian-free Gaza, that's been Netanyahu's goal all along. And then the most recent one I've heard is that he would only deport about 45% of the Palestinians. He would deport maybe 1 million, leaving maybe up to 1.3 million left, assuming that Israel doesn't kill the rest. Neither one of those are American at all. I mean, the idea of forcibly deporting native populations who have lived there for centuries is something we haven't seen since World War II, which is something that the Soviets did and something that we signed off on as part of the Yalta Agreement. So, putting America first is not about, it's not about getting involved in other countries' civil wars or fighting Israel's wars or fighting Biden's war in Ukraine. It's about, doing exactly what Pete Hicks has stated as Secretary of Defense, which is to prioritize U.S. homeland security, strategic defenses, President Trump's Golden Dome, and while also trying to deter Chinese aggression in the Pacific.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I am very nervous about this Trump administration at this point. There seems to already be some dissension in the ranks, right? I know, look, it's been great for the internet. I'm not going to lie. All the, hey, mom and dad are fighting tweets between him and Elon has kept me somewhat entertained. However, it's just not Elon, right? I mean, you got Tulsi Gabbard, who like on all accounts, I mean, she's got a few issues, but there were times I thought, I'd vote for her for president, right? I'm not going to agree with a lot, but I think she at least loves America and isn't going to look for a bunch of silly wars. And there seems to be some fractures happening there. Do we know? Because Trump's last term, like one of his crowning achievements was he brokered a major peace deal over there in the Middle East. And this time it's the exact opposite. Do we know what's different this time? Do we have any inclination on why he's leaving that platform?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article about it on November 13th of last year, essentially entitled Return of the Neocons, talked about how, as they say, um, who you appoint, essentially personnel is policy is what is the saying. So, in other words, Trump's cabinet, who he decided to appoint, they're the ones who set the policy, and you can see that in Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is basically the modern day Henry Kissinger. He's running the State Department at the same time he's heading the National Security Department as well. That's a disturbing amount of power. And if it was someone like Tulsi Gabbard or JD Vance, I'd be all for it. Of course, I'd be supportive of that. But Marco Rubio is essentially the arch neocon in the administration, replacing Mike Waltz, who previously had that role. And of course, President Trump was very inspired to fire Waltz. But the irony is, he fired Waltz in, I think it was just the 1st of May, essentially. And he fired him allegedly because he was conspiring with Netanyahu to bomb Iran. So what was the point of firing his national security advisor when that's exactly what he ended up doing? I was really inspired and impressed when he did that. I'm like, he's putting America first. He's not going to fight Israel's war. He's not going to attack Iran. And I've described that as a trap. Essentially, in answer to your previous question that I didn't fully respond to in the last question, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, his main objective is it's not greater Israel, it's really Israeli hegemony in the region in the Middle East. And he rightly views Iran as the main obstacle to obtaining Israeli hegemony. And of course, there's legitimate reasons for him to hate Iran, because Iran, of course, has been supporting all the Iranian proxies Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the three H's essentially, I call them. And they are all they've all been targeting Israel, and of course they have some reason to, but they're basically terrorists. And he's trying to basically use the U.S. military as a battering ram to destroy the Iranian regime. And unfortunately, Iran has, based on my estimation, they have nuclear weapons and super EMP weapons they could use to kill millions of Americans. And so whenever I see President Trump, threatening to bomb Iran, that's a complete repudiation of his campaign pledge to never, try to stop World War III from happening. Essentially, what I call, prevent Judgment Day or at least delay it. He's trying to bring Judgment Day around, and there's biblical biblical prophecies involved in that. And I just didn't when I voted for Trump, I thought he would be delaying the biblical prophecies of America's potential destruction instead of speeding them on.
Right. Boy, it's like everything is still in the balance, right? Like I honestly thought with getting Trump back in office, it would be at least a semi. Look, it's never going to be totally s- sane while Donald Trump's in office, right? I do think there is a certain level that he does thrive off that chaos. I've often said he seems to be like the Dallas Cowboys of politics, right? There's a lot of money there, but a little bit of dysfunction too. And so I tend to look at this as a very precarious time, right? And as I've looked at Trump, oftentimes I've wondered if it's not the last guy that has his ear is who's going to win that argument. I could be all wet in that. That's just, me looking at it and kind of knowing guys of similar temperament and being able to understand, right? It's the last guy that strokes his ego that's probably going to get the nod. Um, and that's a little spooky um to have that right now in the position we're in.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And if you look at, like Tulsi Gabbard, she's pretty outstanding in terms of America First. I mean, she's a moderate overall in terms of social issues, but she's a real
Mhm.
patriot. She's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army intelligence. And then there's Pete Hegseth. He's pretty America First, and he was reportedly joining with Gabbard and Vance, Vice President Vance, in opposition to the planned U.S. strikes in Iran. Although he doesn't come across that way, but all the reports are saying that he's been one of the ones that are more shut out of Trump's inner circle because he's not a warmonger like Rubio and Ratcliffe at CIA, and then of course General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other folks, bad actors within the administration, both political and military. But the problem is, it's just is what you said is that the rumor, the President Trump's reputation is that he listens to the last person that talks to him and kind of follows that advice. And presumably, the last person that talks to him is, someone like Rubio, essentially. Although it should be JD Vance, really should be
Right.
JD Vance, be the last person in the room. But we know that's not happening because, we know that JD Vance was adamantly against war with Iran, and he actually prevented it. He stopped it in early April when General Corella, U.S. commander of U.S. CENTCOM, and Mike Waltz were pushing it on him. He was able to push back along with with Gabbard and Hegseth and the chief of staff, Trump's chief of staff as well.
So he wanted to bomb Iran clear back in April.
Who's that, Rubio or Trump?
Trump.
Well, President Trump was strongly considering it back in April, but on April 7th, he told Netanyahu in the White House that he was vetoing that, pending a 60-day diplomatic negotiation with Iran. So
Okay.
um, basically, he just delayed what Netanyahu and Waltz wanted him to do from early April to June, late June.
Well, I guess it's one of those things then we're just going to sit back and we're going to have to watch and I think just be very prayerful. It's probably wouldn't be a bad thing to have some extra supplies around and really get used to listening to the spirit because I do think that there is at least a possibility right? I'm not a prophet. I don't pretend to be one. Um, but I do see the makings of trouble out on the horizon, and that's just based off of talking to guys like yourself, right? I don't think that we're done with this quite yet, and
Yeah.
it, I I think it'll go quiet for a while, and I think we're going to have another major flare up, and what that is, I'm not sure, but I imagine that region is just now starting to catch fire all over again.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're facing two fires that Biden helped start in the Middle East and in Ukraine. Um, and another one potentially in Taiwan that I'm really expecting to happen later this year, but certainly no later than 2027. It's been stated that, President Xi Jinping wants to force reunification with Taiwan if he's unsuccessful in achieving that peacefully and diplomatically.
We do know that Iran has been a state sponsor of terror before, right? I was listening to a podcast, and I don't know if I can legally say the name here. I'll tell you after we're done. But he's a national guy and a former operator, that sort of thing. And he had a guest on who was from the agency, and she essentially said, "We have upwards of 1,000 terrorists across our border right now, based off of chatter." So, with where we're at right now, do we as a country need to be worried about terror attacks on the ground sponsored by Iran?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Iran announced the morning after the initial Israeli strikes that Iran was holding the U.S. personally accountable for the strikes and reserved the right to retaliate directly against U.S. military personnel and assets in the region, and basically saying that they knew that there was no way that Israel could have conducted those attacks so successfully without direct, U.S. participation in the terms of intelligence sharing and other support.
Yeah, because those were very targeted. I mean, if there's one thing we can say for the attack that Israel did do, it seems to be very surgical in nature. Um, I do know that our embassy was just hit, I think last night or this morning. And that puts a new spin on things, right? Because now we got skin in the game, so to speak, right? And where do we take it from here? How do you see this one all ending? What do you see panning out as far as this conflict over the coming months?
I mean, really the biggest variable to me is President Trump.
Hmm.
President Trump has been giving conflicting messages, and sadly, he's done the same with Ukraine, where he initially seemed to want to genuinely support peace with Russia. Then he gave them a 22-point ultimatum peace plan, and then when they didn't accept it, he just dropped negotiations altogether. In this case, he is giving signals that he wants a peaceful resolution to the Iran nuclear issue. At the same time, he's cheerleading additional Israeli strikes on Iran. So the question is, which Trump will win out? Will it be the Trump that we voted for, that committed to put America first and keep us safe? Or will it be the Trump that's wanting Israel to continue bombing Iran despite escalating risks of the outbreak of World War III? And to be honest, I've stopped trying to predict how which Trump will prevail. And at this point, I'm increasingly pessimistic based on his latest actions.
Dude, 100%, because you were on right before the election, and you were very bullish on Trump a second time around. Look, and I want to say this. I still think he's better than Biden, right? Because
Sure.
it was weekend at Bernie's in the White House. And the
Much
guys
better. Absolutely.
the guys who were running Biden weren't great guys either, right?
Right.
However, this is worrisome to me, right? When I heard that he essentially greenlit it, I was like, why? Why would we do this? Why go into this exercise? Okay, that takes care of that. I want to move on to Russia and Ukraine now. Again, and we touched on this a little bit. Trump ran really hard on the idea of I'll have, I'll have this wrapped up in 2 weeks. It'll be perfect. You'll love it. And that hasn't been the case. We're 6 months in now, and it's still going, right? Um, so what's the status of that war? Who's winning it? Who's got the upper hand? What's going on there? Because it's kind of taken a back seat in some ways, right? Um, it's hard to get any sort of news on that front as of right now.
Yeah, so Russia, Trump came into office, as you mentioned, promising to end the war on day one of the war. He actually, I think it was right before he took office, he said, okay, maybe not day one, maybe 6 months down the road. And then Keith Kellogg said, yeah, we think we could do it in 4 months, 120 days. And uh, so we had kind of an adjustment. I'm like, we don't need that long. We can end it the first week. And I published a whole slew of articles on how Trump could do that. And I actually got one of my articles into the hands of one of his top cabinet members. I never really thought that they would implement my full plan, but for a while it seemed like they were implementing parts of it. But then essentially Trump never has engaged in any serious negotiations with Russia over how to end the war. I mean, there's been brief meetings here and there. Um, I think there have been a couple meetings between Secretary Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, but Trump has refused to meet with Putin. I mean, he hasn't said so outright. He said, "Oh yeah, we'll meet sometime, and nothing will ever get final. Will never be peace in Ukraine until me and Putin meet." And yet 5 months in, there's no meeting scheduled. The Russians have been saying, "We stand ready to meet with Trump," at a moment's notice when he did, but he needs to initiate it. They said the White House needs to call them, and they'll set something up, and they'll have a summit, and they'll resolve as many issues as possible, agree to disagree where we can't find common ground, and they're serious about wanting to wrap this thing up. But as I mentioned earlier, Trump foolishly decided to accept the Kellogg peace plan. The Kellogg peace plan ended up being a 22-point peace plan, which was I think it was first socialized with the Zelensky and European leaders. I think it was like April 21st, around that time. I think Rubio went to Paris, and basically the Ukrainians walked out. I think, if I'm remembering right, what the timeline was, but Ukraine never accepted any of our peace proposal. They only accepted the 30-day ceasefire with conditions that they knew Russia would never accept. And that was just really a propaganda measure because they had been the most vehement against a ceasefire prior to that. And basically, the Kellogg peace plan mandates that there be a ceasefire before there are any serious peace negotiations in terms of the terms of the final peace agreement. And Russia said that the only way they'll have a ceasefire is if we've reached substantial agreement on the peace terms. So we've had two conflicting positions, ensuring the war goes on indefinitely. And meanwhile, since March 11th, Trump has been doing everything he can to support Ukraine militarily and continue offensive intelligence sharing. Maybe not for long-range targets deep inside of Russia. I'm not sure about that one. But according to Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Trump is sharing offensive intelligence authorization for the use of deep strike U.S. missiles. I think that is probably not true. But what disturbed me is that the Trump White House did not try to rebut that. And if in fact, that's a very provocative claim by Merz, and if Trump wasn't doing that, I would have thought that the very next day, within 24 hours, the White House would have came out and rebutted that. So it gives every impression that Trump is essentially Biden number two in terms of the Ukraine war, and of course, with the minerals deal, that was signed on Zelensky's terms. There's no terms of the agreement that are beneficial to the U.S. whatsoever. They won't pay back a single dime, just as Zelensky promised. Not a single dime of the $350 billion will ever be paid back. They reserve full control over all their natural resources, so we don't have any real claim to their raw materials, rare earths. And worst of all, according to Ukraine, it's basically a 10-year security pact where we're mandated to continue selling arms to them over the next 10 years. So it's basically almost a blank check. I won't say it's a blank check because we're not actually giving them the arms; we're selling them to them. So I mean that's kind of kind of a little difference. We're not giving them massive financial aid packages like we used to,
I guess we
but
won't go as broke as quickly. So I mean, we got that going for us, right?
yeah. But the bottom line is, we're going to keep fighting the last Ukrainian. Now, in terms of the other question you asked was how the war is going, and Russia's been winning the war at an increasing rate. If you look at a map, it's easy to understand why so many people think that the war is a stalemate, because the amount of territory Russia's captured over the last few years has been very unimpressive. Initially, they had massive success. They were at the gates of Kyiv, 10 miles away from the city center. And then they came to agreement on the Istanbul Agreement, and Putin decided to jump the gun and announce a full withdrawal of all Russian forces from 30% of Russian-held territory in three Ukrainian northern oblasts, including Kyiv. And they were his troops. Up to that point, Ukraine had not yet recaptured any territory from the Russians at all. And as soon as the Russians departed, they were able to recapture that huge swath of territory. And we were forced to, Biden essentially propagandized it and said, "Oh, the Russians are running away. It's the Ukrainian offensive," and they didn't have any offensive forces capable of an offensive at that time, the counteroffensive that was meaningful. But by April 4th, all those Russian troops had been withdrawn, and then of course we know that Boris Johnson showed up in Kyiv and pressured Zelensky to do what he already planned to do, which was not to show up for the signing of the Istanbul Agreement with Putin in Istanbul on April 9th. Under the terms of that agreement, all Russian troops would have been withdrawn from all Ukraine's pre-war territory, and the lives of, in terms of killed and wounded, of 2 million brave Ukrainian troops would have been saved. And that's really the total, basically, is that we've seen at least 2 million Ukrainian casualties, of which 750,000 are dead. The Russians' casualties have been 6.3 times less, probably around 120,000 in terms of killed, and maybe a lot more than that wounded, but maybe 250,000 plus total. So obviously Russia has over five times more people than Ukraine. They have 16,000 more nukes. If you look at a map, they have 35 times more territory. 11 times more greater size economy. Fourth largest economy in the world, used to be sixth largest before the war. Russia's military has expanded at a breathtaking pace. I think their army is almost 3 times larger than what it was before. So the winner is not in doubt. Ukraine's hovering near military collapse. They're down to about 350,000 troops max active duty, and they're running out of reserves. And when they do run out of reserves, the Russian forces that are outnumber them over 2 to 1 will likely be able to sweep across Ukraine and occupy nearly half of Ukraine to the Dnieper River.
I'm afraid of the answer to this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. What's the biggest obstacle to peace over there in this conflict? Because it's gone on what now? Essentially 4 years, right? We're starting the fifth year, I guess, 4.5 years. What's the biggest obstacle there?
Yeah, I mean, the war's gone on for it's now been 3 years and almost 4 months, and the biggest obstacle to peace has always been Volodymyr Zelensky. He is he behaves like he's the head of a nuclear superpower. Trump hasn't been able to persuade him to make even the slightest concession in terms of peace terms with Russia. He still has maximalist peace terms, which entail demanding that Russia pay 300 billion in reparations to Ukraine, that all Russian troops be withdrawn from all prior Ukrainian territory, including the Donbass region and Crimea, and also demanding that Putin surrender himself at The Hague for war criminal tribunal prosecutions. So, needless to say, none of those demands are achievable. When you think about achieving peace, you need to be realistic. You can't have demands that are unachievable, or else the war continues indefinitely. And he's continuing to fight this war because he knows that as soon as the war ends, he's going to be thrown out of office. The polls that I've seen have him at about 9 to 16% popularity in terms of reelection numbers. And so, he's a dictator. He's a brutal, murderous dictator, and kills his own people, assassinates opposition political leaders, and he's doing his best to embezzle enough U.S. taxpayer money to become a billionaire oligarch, which I think is his real goal. And he knows that he's going to have to flee in exile because he would be prosecuted on corruption charges by his successor if indeed the war ends and he loses an election to in terms of the presidency.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, so I feel like there's two things that are conflicting here, right? One is that we just got done saying that, Russia's clearly gaining momentum now, right? Momentum's on their side. So if everything stays as is, with American support, even with us selling them weapons, um, and again, this isn't an indictment upon us. We're not fighting that war, but regardless, even with us selling them weapons, it sounds like if something doesn't change, Ukraine will definitely lose in the next little while, right? So what is Zelensky's end game? Is it just to ride it out as long as he can and then wait for the gates to fall and then helicopter on out to whatever island he's arranged for himself? Is that kind of what we're looking at here, David?
So what he believes is that, and what I think he might have been promised by, the UK and France, is that in the event that Russian forces achieve major breakthroughs along the front and drive to the Dnieper River, that Britain and France will parachute. They'll drive in tens of thousands of troops and to help defend the Dnieper River line to protect the Zelensky regime in the western and central Ukraine. And then, if necessary, Zelensky can relocate the capital to Lviv, which is a much more secure location, not far from the Polish border. Yeah, I think that's probably what he thinks would happen. But what he really hopes would happen is that the U.S. would join the war as well, and in the belief that if the U.S. were to fight Russia, then that's the only hope for Ukraine ever regaining its lost territories.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm again another conflict where I'm not sure you could just point to a white hat and a black hat, right? I'm not sure there's a good guy in the mix. Um, I I would like to touch on that exchange that happened in the White House that got so much traction earlier this year. Was that just kabuki theater? I mean, was that just, Trump kind of grandstanding, knowing he was going to go in a different direction, trying to maybe um, get his base off of his back, so to speak? What did we see there? Was any of that serious, do you think, or was it just theater?
No, I think it was all genuine. I think that President Trump started his administration with a really clear plan as to what to do. I mean, very impressive in so many ways. Again, the biggest flaw that he had was the Kellogg plan, because that was never going to achieve peace in Ukraine. Russia was never going to agree to that. But in terms of trade and so many other things, I mean, he just implemented his plan like warp speed, and acted really decisively. But then I think he kind of didn't know how to react, to developments. He just kind of made up policy on the fly in terms of change, new policy. But that was very sincere. That Zelensky exchange in the White House on February 28th. So the way Trump responded, he would placate Zelensky and let him be verbally abused as a Putin puppet, and then Vance defended him. And after Vance defended him, Trump decided to tell Zelensky off, and Zelensky was swearing in Ukrainian under his breath. I think Ukrainian or Russian, some foul language that I can't say
Sure.
here, but that was all sincere, and it was amazing. Even Lindsey Graham was saying, "Hey, I think we're going to need to have Zelensky replaced because he told off the president of the White House."
Hmm. It's interesting he had him kind of on the ropes like that and then kind of went the other direction. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to Taiwan and Russia because I don't
Trying
think
to go.
that's put to bed yet. When we talked last time, it looked like that could be imminent, right? If Biden was reelected. Now, Biden wasn't reelected, Trump was, but where does that conflict, well, I shouldn't say conflict, pre-conflict, proto-conflict, however you want to put it. Where's that standing right now?
Well, so Xi Jinping, Chinese president, made a very interesting comment. He said that he had ordered the PLA to be ready for war by April 1st. Then on April 1st, there was a massive Chinese military exercise, consisting of naval, air, and ground forces with actual missile strikes that were practiced not far off of Taiwanese waters. And I thought that might be it. I thought that might be the big one. And thankfully, it wasn't. But I think China's really hoping that we bomb Iran and
Mm,
and maybe even get involved in a war with Russia, and then they can watch as our military forces are degraded and maybe even the U.S. destroyed without them having to lift a finger. But more probably, they would assume that that wouldn't happen, but that we would be so bogged down in wars with Russia and Ukraine and more likely Iran in the Middle East, that we would lack the military capability to effectively respond to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
gotcha. Gotcha. So, do you think that's still on the table while Trump's in office?
I would be shocked. I mean, I would wager 99% chance of China invading Taiwan by 2027. I think I actually been predicting that later this year. I mean, for ever since 2020, I've said 2025 was the deadline that I had uh, read that Xi Jinping was ready to, forcibly reunify Taiwan. But since I've come to the belief that 2027 is the absolute drop dead date, so it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the next 2 years. I can't, I'm not going to
Sure.
predict
No.
exactly when, but if I was a betting I would likely say most likely in October. I'd say 50% chance.
Phew. What does that mean for the US if China was to invade and seize control of Taiwan?
Well, again, all of this depends on President Trump. The President of the United States has tremendous power to determine the fate of the United States, whether we survive long term or whether we lose our country is really dependent on the decisions that he makes. And nowhere is that more the case, I think, than with the Chinese invasion of Taiwan, because if we were to not respond, then I think that China would have no reason to attack us militarily, and we would just kind of move on and realize that Taiwan was never that important or strategic as so many neocons have said it was. And I say that reluctantly as someone who's been a lifelong supporter of Taiwan, but the balance of power has shifted dramatically. 20 years ago, China didn't have near the capabilities to invade Taiwan. Now I mean, they've had the capability since 2020. So for the last 5 years, there's been a window of vulnerability that it's only a matter of time when they decide to exploit that window, and it's likely to be sooner rather than later.
So with that,
But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
let me just
Yeah.
add to that if Trump were to decide to defend Taiwan militarily, then China would execute its plan to destroy the U.S. With multiple vectors of attack. they would likely start with a massive cyber attack against the United States on day one of major combat operations that would take down our grid, take down all of our critical infrastructure. They already have up to 100,000 PLA troops, half of which are probably special forces operating behind the lines in U.S. territory that crossed into our country from October
Mhm.
2019 to January of this year. And those troops are positioned mostly on Chinese-owned farmlands, which are located near 17 U.S. Key U.S. military bases. And if you look at a map of Chinese-owned farmlands, you'll notice that about a third of Utah's land is owned by China.
That doesn't bode well. Um, so what if I keep hearing about the chips, right? The microchips if Taiwan's invaded, there's no guarantee Russia that China would sell those to us, right?
Well, I think their default position would be to resell them at a higher price. We've seen that with rare earths, with the exception of times when, Trump's threatening China, then they'll temporarily suspend sale of rare earths to the US. I think that would be their default. But if we were to either have massive sanctions on China, kind of Russia style massive sanctions on China in response to their invasion of Taiwan, or of course, if we go to war against them, then obviously they
Sure.
will stop selling them. And but to be honest, there's a lot in a lot of war scenarios, those plants get destroyed. So, in fact, I was working for Vivek Ramaswamy, and we were deciding on his foreign policy positions, and we were doing a Zoom briefing, and he told me. He said that he asked me if we should do that. And I initially said no, but then I thought later, I'm like, yeah, that's actually a good idea. Because I don't think if we were to pop off a bunch of missiles at Taiwan versus China, I think, and kind of announce, maybe give them like some kind of warning time that, we weren't attacking them. We were just taking out the Taiwan semiconductor facilities. I don't think that would start a war. So I think we could do that. And the mentality in the U.S. is that we should. It would be better for us to destroy them than to allow those chips to fall under Chinese control, where they would have almost a monopoly, not a monopoly, but close to it in terms of advanced microchips. Given that Taiwan sells 90% of the world's advanced semiconductor supply.
Okay. I want to talk about just for a second, right? Because it sounds like you're pretty sure that an invasion of Taiwan is going to happen in one form or another. Now,
Yeah, blockade or invasion. That's right.
so I think it was Ali or was it Tyson? One of those boxers said everyone's got a plan until you walk in and get punched in the face, right? To my knowledge, China hasn't really been in any foreign skirmishes in a long, long time, right? Probably World War II.
Vietnam, actually, they fought a
Okay.
border war against Vietnam in '79.
Okay, Vietnam. Still a good chunk of time, right? We're approaching 40 years on that. Do they have like I can't imagine that Taiwan would just roll over necessarily, right? I went back and I did some research and at the American Revolution, just as an example, right? Not saying that they're anywhere near a Jeffersonian republic, right? Not saying that, but just as people go. And it was roughly 30% were in favor of the crown here. Um, I want to say like another 20 some percent were neutral. A good chunk were in favor of it, but there was only 3% that were willing to fight in the war, right? Of the revolution. But it was enough with insurgent kind of tactics, right? Do you think China can withstand and hold up to an insurgency like that, right? We certainly found out in places in Iraq as well as I think you can lump Vietnam in there with that too, that fighting insurgency is a different animal altogether, right? Because you're not going to war like we've been used to. Do you think China has the stomach and the capabilities to fight against a war of insurgency?
I think it's very unlikely that Taiwan could mount an effective insurgency to Chinese occupation forces. They would likely be cut off and blockaded from outside support.
Okay.
Much of their, arms stocks would likely have been captured and either destroyed or, taken over by the Chinese. So I do think that China could do that. Most of the estimates that I've seen says that, in a full Chinese amphibious invasion and airborne, or rather, airborne slash air mobile campaign and invasion of Taiwan, China could take Taipei within by day 15 of the war. So at that point, I think we're, especially with cyber attacks, I would envision a massive cyber attack on Taiwan, shutting down their critical infrastructure. They, essentially causing them to run out of gas. The gas pumps wouldn't work, and the communications would be down. They'd be unable to coordinate above company level. Essentially decapitated, and of course, there's decapitation plans. Their special forces have plans to decapitate the Taiwan's military and political leadership, as well as taking out the Taiwanese Air Force and Navy. They could do that within 48 hours, according to the estimates that I've seen. So really, without effective U.S. military intervention, which we just don't have the forces there anymore, we're completely outnumbered, almost 10 to 1 in terms of naval forces in the Taiwan region. It would be likely be a few week campaign at most. Certainly there would be some resistance, but in terms of the actual victory and capitulation, it'd likely be in the 3 week range.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Whew. Now, one other variable I wanted to look at here in terms of Taiwan and China. Um, I did a little bit of my own homework, right? Because I want to at least pretend to talk intelligently about these things. I do find them fascinating. Japan seems to be building again, building up its armaments. Um, and I was reading a little bit of the history between China and Japan and China and South Korea. And it was interesting that they still look at those folks as quote Mongols, right? They call them the Mongols on the peninsula and the Mongols on the island. Obviously, going back to Genghis Khan and that sort of thing. Do they provide any sort of deterrence at all if let's say Japan was to say, you know what, this is getting a little close to home. I don't want to do this anymore. There's a lot of bad blood there, right, David? From World War II.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the Japanese were brutal to the Chinese, probably killed millions of Chinese during the Second Sino-Japanese War. And the Chinese have never forgiven them for that. They occupied, obviously, Beijing and Shanghai and many other large Chinese cities. And yeah, the Chinese hate the Japanese. And they've made no bones about the fact that if Japan joins the war against them with the U.S., that they would carve up and occupy Japan into 5 different countries or occupation zones or whatever the case might be with Russia, and that they would use nuclear weapons on Japanese cities. So I think from what I've heard from most Japanese leaders, obviously none of the countries in that region have stated definitively that they would ally with the U.S. militarily against China in terms of actual direct military involvement, and that's understandable because the U.S. itself has a policy of strategic ambiguity that with the exception of the Biden regime where they said we absolutely would defend Taiwan, U.S. policy has been not to state clearly whether we would or not. But I think in all likelihood, obviously, in the case of just a purely conventional war, Japanese U.S. military bases on Japanese territory would be hit very hard. Our ships would be sunk, and that would give Japan some degree of incentive to consider joining the war, but also perhaps seeing the rapidity of U.S. forces being essentially Pearl Harbored within the first few days of the war, they might set out peace feelers kind of a separate piece with China and say, hey, we're not involved. Just
Gotcha.
please don't attack us, and we won't attack you. And I think China might respect. They likely would respect that. But any overt moves militarily, Japan would get occupied in short order, I think, by Russia and China.
And didn't here not too long ago, didn't she end up changing some stuff and isn't he now appointed pretty much for life?
Yeah, I think it was back in 2022 that it was on the 10-year anniversary of um, his tenure as president of China, the People's Republic of China. And of course, his main role is as general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, but he also holds the office of president of China. That was a development that happened, I think, after Xiaoping, where it's become traditional for a Chinese leader to hold both those titles. But he essentially made himself dictator, president for life at that 2000 October 2022 Chinese Communist Party Congress. And so you're right. Yeah, he's president for life. He's a dictator for life.
And the only reason I bring that up is that seems to be a clear departure from what China had been going on, right? Because in my research, if I'm not mistaken, it would kind of alternate almost between branches, right? So you'd have the military, then you'd have someone from home, and then someone from another department. And it kind of just did a round robin kind of a thing, like you're up. But didn't G come from the military side of things? Correct me if I'm wrong there, David.
Well, Xi Jinping has always been a Communist Party functionary leader. He's never served in the PLA
Okay,
itself. But yeah, he's just worked his way up through the ranks, and I think trying to remember who the president he served as vice president under, but obviously he knew President Biden when they were both vice presidents, I think, during the Obama years, during the first Obama's first term. But yeah, he's just been a Communist Party functionary. I think it was his dad or grandfather. I think it was father that served as a Communist Party leader at the local level as well.
gotcha. And do you see this more as do you think he's pushing for more of a dynastic kind of a thing now? Kind of a return to an emperor kind of status? I mean, without calling it an emperor kind of status. Because I think that could affect our foreign policy towards China, right? Because if it's a different type of government, you're going to have to deal with it a little differently, I would think.
Well, I haven't seen any evidence of that. Obviously, that's always been the case with North Korea. Kim Jong-un is the grandson of Kim Il-sung,
Hmm.
the North Korea's first dictator. But no, I've not seen any evidence to suggest that's the case. I mean, certainly he could do that. He has the ability to do that. But I think it's more likely he'll have a hand-picked successor when he's in his advanced age.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, I got one more question about Russia, the conflict with Russia and Ukraine and Taiwan and China. And then I want to move on to stuff at home. But the question is this, again, doing a little bit of research, I find it interesting that both of those countries have been facing massive population collapse. I think China, I read that there are 40 million young men who have no marriage prospects. Um, Russia was in such bad condition that they were talking about like really incentivizing childbirths, right? Trying to get the population numbers up. Do do you see any evidence that a declining population has anything to do with these wars happening right now?
No, I see absolutely no evidence of that. Certainly correct that Russia and China have both been undergoing population reductions, but it's pretty gradual. In
Okay.
terms of if you were to look at there's a 2050 economic predictor that shows that Russia would remain. Well, at that point, it was the sixth largest economy, and it was predicting that it would stay that. But it showed the U.S. declining, I think, to the third or even the fourth, probably the third largest economy, and I think we're currently second behind China. Um, but yeah, so the U.S. is actually this is something that people don't realize is that population is not the key predictor of economic potential or military power. as it used to be in the good old days, like in World War I, before the atomic age and before the event of modern weapon systems. But a lot of it has to do with natural resources. Russia is tremendous, natural resources, some of which remain untapped. So that's really the source of the riches. It's not just oil. The oil is probably the key, the foremost natural resources, which they do have. They sell us uranium and all kinds of different rare earths. China is a massive manufacturing power. So there's really two ways to become a rich and powerful country. Traditionally, it's at least in modern days, it's either through natural resources or rare earths, or through manufacturing capabilities. And based on I recently did a deep dive into China's manufacturing capabilities and concluded it's likely 3.8 times larger than ours in terms of industrial manufacturing might by purchase power parity. So, I mean, that's like the difference between the US and Japan during World War II. So if we were to have, for example, a Pacific War, a repeat of the Pacific War in World War II, we would essentially be playing the part of Japan because China has the ability to outproduce us by 232 times to one in terms of ships. So they could, even if we sunk all their ships, they could build a new fleet. Basically, they're building this, the number of ships or the tonnage of the entire Royal Navy every year.
Wow. Holy cow. All right, let's switch to home because now even home's on fire. Um, with those raids in LA, what's your takeaway on that? Um, because I've gotten mixed reports, right? Some were that they were very targeted. They were going after only the baddest of the bad, so to speak. Others say they were just rounding them up, right? Waiting, going to Home Depot and just putting them in the back and taking them off. What have you heard any intelligence on that? Anything that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, there were ICE raids going on in terms of mostly violent criminals, but I did recently read that some of the raids, and I haven't confirmed that they were in LA, but the Trump administration was also raiding some hotels and restaurants. No, they wouldn't raid homes, but places of business, which were, where it's illegal for illegal
Mhm.
immigrants to be employed, they would raid those as well. And that of course, and by the way, that's something they discontinued. So they actually ceded something important to the protests by discontinuing all raids against hotels and restaurants and businesses for illegals. That was a recent order since the war between Iran and Israel erupted. But the LA riots were, I mean, that was propagated by, mainly Antifa and Black Lives Matter, likely also
Mhm.
supported by the Revolutionary Communist Party, which has been active here in Utah for supporting the leftist protests. And that's a group that wants to overthrow the U.S. government. It's a group that wants to establish a Castroite communist government, a regime here in the U.S., which would, essentially destroy all rights and communize everything. Um, Essentially, domestic far left terrorists were responsible, and obviously we saw that in was it Minnesota, where
Yeah,
a state senator was killed, and really four
a whole
two
kill list. Yeah.
legislators were shot, two were killed, a legislator and his wife, or her husband, and then the other one survived with his wife, but expected pull out of surgery. But essentially, we're facing all of these far left extremists, and they pose a tremendous domestic security threat to the U.S. Biden infamously warned during his one or more of his presidential addresses that it was right-wing extremists that pose the greatest threat. And we haven't seen that. We saw, I guess we could concede that January 6th was kind of an exception, and we saw some violence, mainly just trespassing and breaking of windows and stuff, maybe some pushes against law enforcement officers, but really nothing else but that. There was no law enforcement officers were killed by the protesters / rioters on January 6th. But the Black Lives Matter, there was 24 police officers that were shot dead and 2,000 wounded during the protests of summer 2020. And of course, there was an attempt to lynch the President of the United States on May 30th, 2020, at the White House, where the White House had to go dark and snipers came out, and the president and his family were manhandled to the presidential emergency bunker to escape potential threats to their lives. So, there's just no question that, not to mention the trans terrorists and all the crazy left wing and the
Yeah.
folks that kill, black mass shooters that kill a bunch of white people. I mean, certainly there are incidents on the other side too. So I don't want to suggest there aren't, but most of the incidents have been on the far left side. And so, they really do pose a huge threat. And I believe they're working with and are funded not just by George Soros, but in fact, enemy nations as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I know for a fact that if there's a country that's teetering on the brink, we will drop assets in to either give it a push or stabilize it, right? And not
Right.
necessarily military kind of actions, but more agent provocateur type things. So you do think we're seeing that from foreign actors as well?
Absolutely. And it might not, it's likely not direct, but probably indirect funding, certainly from China, uh, communist Venezuela, other nations, maybe Cuba. Um, and as you mentioned, there's likely at least 1,000 Iranian or Iranian allied terrorists, including Al Qaeda and Hezbollah and other groups, operating right here in the United States, ready to, if we get into a direct bombing strikes on Iran, they'd likely be activated, and they could, conduct sabotage operations and terrorist attacks throughout the country.
Gotcha. The other thing that has got me worried about this, and I was wondering if you could speak to this a little bit. I remember back around, I want to say it was 2010 when the Arab Spring happened, and we just saw country after country go through massive turmoil. Um, could we be looking at something similar happening to us here? I noticed that these, I don't even want to call them protests, they're riots, right? Could we be looking at something similar here happening to us right now?
I think the risks of that are pretty limited. Short of regional or massive cyber attacks, I don't see our society breaking down or revolution occurring. I think, despite the fact that we only have 50% of law enforcement officers today that we had when Biden took office, I think that that's still sufficient to maintain overall order. Obviously, we can't makes it much more difficult to counter like violent criminals and individual riots. But I think the chances of that happening are pretty low. I think the chance of a revolution without outside help, such as invasion or cyber attack, or something even worse, are pretty low.
Okay. My other question on that is I know that Trump mobilized, I think, 500 Marines. Did their boots ever touch ground in that conflict?
Yeah. There are actually hundreds of Marines have been deployed by the Trump administration to keep order in Los Angeles. And I recently learned that there was a precedent for that George H.W. Bush actually mobilized 1,200 Marines to keep order, restore order during the Rodney King riots back in '92. So, I think that was a smart move, and I think it sends a good signal. And they were deployed with their weapons and ammo, but the ammo is not in the chamber. They don't have the magazines are unloaded, on their persons, but not actually, in the firearm.
Is there This is where I get nervous, right? Because on one hand, I agree, you got to restore law and order. On the other hand, it's another thing to have um, American warriors trying to corral Americans. And that's not necessarily because of who's in office now. I worry about the next go round, right? Let's say it's another COVID kind of situation where, you know, do they use the military to keep people socially distanced, lock down, that sort of thing. I worry it's a bad precedent. The only thing I really have hope on there, and I think you can speak uniquely to this, is the oath that everybody takes when they join the military, right? That they're going to defend and um, uphold the Constitution of the United States. Uh, do you think that that's misplaced? Do you think that maybe do our soldiers have a firm enough grasp on what the Constitution is to make sure that they do enforce that and that alone?
Um, I think the question of that is a little nuanced. There's been some surveys of our troops that have indicated that over half of them would be willing to pull the trigger on U.S. civilians if ordered to. Obviously not, it would be some kind of riot situation. They wouldn't just
Right.
say to shoot someone randomly. So um, I don't think most of them are in the position where they would disobey orders. But certainly there'd be some good ones at maybe at the lower officer level that would, or even the mid to high officer level uh, that might refuse illegal orders.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Um, Finally, I want to move on to Trump, and I'm glad you said what you said because it's been some of my concern here. I looked at Trump and look, I was always pretty nuanced, right? I was like, well, he's probably better than anything we got now, but certainly I wasn't necessarily calling him the savior of the republic, right? I think he did come with some issues, but again, heck of a lot better than what we had before. But I looked at Trump and I am surprised a little bit that he was able to be corralled as quickly as he has been. Is there any indication of what happens to to someone like Trump, who it looks like by all accounts can't be bought, can't be bullied, but yet somehow finds himself where every other American president has been?
Well, I think it starts with the deep state. The deep state is burrowed inside U.S. intelligence agencies. So, regardless of who the president is, they kind of propagandize the same neocon imperialist rhetoric and politicize the intelligence. Uh, Interestingly, our intelligence agencies are certainly before Trump took office and likely still, they're pretty pro-China in terms of they traditionally have greatly underestimated the Chinese threat, in terms of China's nuclear arsenal by 4 to 1 um, historically. So where they're saying it's like 600 warheads, it's likely at least 4 times that. They likely have more warheads than we do. But yeah, I mean, they push this globalist agenda, and the more times you hear a lie, and the more time it's reinforced by the mainstream media, if you're not strong-minded in terms of critical thinking, then you're likely to begin to accept it at some point. And I think that's what's happened with Trump. And I say that reluctantly because Trump has tremendously good instincts when it comes to foreign policy. Like usually his initial opinion is the right one, but he's known for the fact that he can be swayed by whichever of his advisors talked to him in last. So uh, if you have a neocon, as the last briefer, and then he goes out to give a speech, then he's likely to parrot a lot of the things that the neocon advisor says. And so that's why you have him saying really good stuff on one day with Russia, not so much anymore because we haven't really heard anything good on Russia from him lately. But earlier in his administration, then the next day he's saying, "Oh, we need to support Zelensky, and we're just going to shovel arms to him, sell arms to him indefinitely, and if he doesn't want to, we'll just let them just try to make peace when he knows there's zero chance of that, and really abdicating all attempts to try to uh, accomplish what he wanted to do initially, which was to his brilliant plan to divide the Sino-Russian military alliance by transforming Russia from an adversary to a strategic partner. And
Gotcha.
it's really sad that he's decided to give up on that noble dream.
Whew. Okay, just two more questions and then I'll let you go here. What do you think the next 6 months holds for the globe at large, and what does it mean for us here at home?
Well, I have to say that this bombing campaign by Israel against Iran has got me a little bit on edge. I'm ready. Personally, I'm ready to face what's coming. I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen eventually. The U.S. is going to face collapse due to the foolish policies of U.S. leaders provoking World War III. But obviously, most of me would prefer that happen later than sooner. And my hope was that President Trump could delay Judgment Day, I guess, to use Terminator terms. But it doesn't seem like that's likely to be the case. I mean, he's actually, uh, I wouldn't say that he's escalated the war in Ukraine, although in some respects, he's simply propagated the dangerous level of escalation that Biden had done with, the long range U.S. missile strikes in Russia. But certainly in terms of Israel, I mean, he's poured flames on the fire, without a doubt. And, he not only started the 2 month war with Yemen, he restarted the war, helped Israel restart the war in Gaza, and then they invaded a bunch of other countries, obviously Lebanon mainly, and then now striking Iran, leading to potential nuclear escalation and all kinds of existential threats that we likely would not be exposed to were not for U.S. support for those strikes. So I'm pretty pessimistic. When we last spoke, I was really bullish, and I'm like, Trump's going to make peace. He's going to save us from World War III. This is a blessing. This is kind of what the Lord wanted and intended or planned. And now I'm kind of done a 180 in terms of based on Trump's performance. His about face on forever wars and his willingness to go to the brink of World War III for no reason.
So you think more global unrest is for sure to come.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the situation will continue to get worse and worse over the course of the Trump presidency, unless he changes course. I mean, really, he's a free agent. He can fire all his neocon advisors in one day, replace them with JD Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. He could point Tulsi Gabbard as Secretary of State and interim national security advisor tomorrow, and make peace with Russia, force Israel to make peace with Iran, and we could and refuse to defend Taiwan militarily and make a deal with China over Taiwan, and we could continue having peace almost, at least until someone like Kamala Harris, gets elected president.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
That's my hope, but I just think that's an unlikely possibility at this
And
point.
all I don't want to call them theaters because I don't think that's a fair word, but in all three of those regions, the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, and Taiwan, and the Pacific, there with China and Taiwan, all three of those things get worse.
So yeah, I think well, I don't think that I think the situation is fairly stable with regards to Russia and Ukraine because despite our attempts, Western attempts to escalate the war and Ukrainian attempts to escalate the war, Putin has been very restrained in his response. So, but at the same time, obviously, he's likely tiring with the Trump administration's refusal to make peace or restore, normal economic relations with Russia. So obviously, he still views the U.S. as the main adversary. With regards to China and Taiwan, I still have some hope that based on all of Trump's statements, I would, you'd have to conclude that Trump would not defend Taiwan militarily. But the possibility for accidental escalation to a full-scale war,
Hmm.
I think, is high because I think he'd be pressured into sending the U.S. Pacific Fleet within striking range of the Chinese blockade, and there could be some interactions in terms of, missile launches or warning shots that were misinterpreted that could lead to escalate to a full-scale war. So I guess I'm more hopeful with regards to the Taiwan theater. Um, but yeah, I view that the Iran conflict is as the most likely trigger for World War III at this point. And Trump has recently stated that the U.S. might join the war. It might join a bombing campaign against Iran with Israel.
And again, Iran has a compact with two of our biggest, um, I don't know, antagonists at this point, right? With Russia and China. So that does have the ability to blow up. In terms of, look, a large portion of why Trump got elected was because things were really good on Wall Street, but really crappy on Main Street. He has instituted the tariffs, right? And I go back and forth on tariffs. I'll be honest. Part of me is like, yeah, we got to do something. The other part of me is like, this isn't helping. Where do we stand economically, right? Because I do think as we go economically, we'll also end up going militarily, right? So if we in your, just as you said, if we drop down to fourth in economic power, I think we could go down to second or third militarily, right? Just because we don't have the money to fund it. Any idea if the tariffs are having the impact that Trump was hoping that they were having? Um, I can tell you my grocery bill hasn't gone down, and I know people are still suffering out there. And when Trump got elected, the thought was, well, he's got a blank check for 4 years. And I was like, that's not true. He's got a blank check for two, right? And it's not even really a blank check. He's got to start showing some sort of production in these next 2 years, or the midterms will come around and he'll lose his majority. Any idea which way that's going to fall in the next year and a half here?
Well, I think the midterms, Democrats are likely favored to retake both the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, I mean, if you look at the polls today, I think we'd hold both the House and the Senate unquestionably. So things would have to change, but the average midterm loss in the House, I think it's something on the order of 25 seats, 24 seats at least. We currently have 220 or 221, I think it's 220 House seats
Mm-hmm.
against like 213 because there's a few Democrat, two Democrat vacancies, maybe even three. In the Senate, we're a little bit in better position there, but I would say it's a 50-50 chance at this point whether we would hold the Senate. So you're right. And not only that, but we can't even corral our own Republicans together, and a lot of
Right.
all this stuff. Big, beautiful bill. We passed it by a narrow margin out of the House, and the Senate's, we don't even have near the votes we need to pass the House version. So they're redoing that. During the first 100 days of the Trump administration, Congress passed 6 bills, which is an all-time low in modern history for the number of bills passed by party in power. So in terms of legislative victories, the Trump administration has done poorly. In terms of their executive orders, I think they've done amazingly well. Really great executive orders. A lot of executive measures have been really good. The tariffs have been really good. Unfortunately, the problem with the tariffs is that we need higher tariffs. We need to
Mm-hmm.
reciprocal tariffs. The Trump tariffs didn't go far enough, but they were only 50% reciprocal. So if Vietnam, for example, had 96% tariff on us, or 92%, I think, and we had 46% back at them. The new deal he negotiated with China is not too bad. Basically, they have 77% effective tariffs on us. Ours, I think, are about 50% thereabouts. So much more equitable than before he came to office. So I'm the problem is that they don't actually honor their agreements. So it's extremely unlikely that they'll honor what they signed up to. But at least we have 50% tariffs back on them overall. But the other tariffs that we had have been suspended, pending talks. And uh, so basically, tariffs, I think, are one of the most effective ways to build your industrial base. And I don't think he's using them enough. But I'm really happy. I'm very pleased with the direction that he's taken us, and his realization that tariffs are what built us in the greatest manufacturing industrial power on the planet in the early 1900s. So I'd like to see more of that. And obviously, there's a price to be paid in terms of some higher consumer prices, which I haven't really seen because the tariffs have kind of been on and off. But I think that is a very important key tool in the president's arsenal to rebuild our economy and mainly our industrial base, so that we can begin building our own weapons again. Because currently we have to import Chinese parts and foreign parts to build our advanced weapon systems.
Mm-hmm. Has there been any moves that you've noticed start producing that more at home?
So the key is to invoke the defense. Trying to think what it's called, but there's kind of an emergency defense industrial production act that was, I think it was invoked by Biden for like, COVID measures, masks and different stuff like that, medical supplies. I think the Trump administration has invoked that for certain things. I'd like to see him do more of that. So I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of, defense industrial production, but we're still woefully behind China.
Gotcha. Okay, and do you see that changing much at all? The way things are right now. Do you think that'll hold pretty much through at least the next year and a half?
Yeah, I think there'll be incremental progress on that front during the remainder of the Trump term, but not sufficient to be able to credibly deter Chinese aggression.
Okay. So I want to take all these things we talked about now, right? We got the conflict in the Middle East now with Israel and Iran, the ongoing stuff with Ukraine and Russia, and finally Taiwan and China. We're not in great shape financially still. It's going to take a long time, I think, to get that back on track. What with the threat of war either escalating or breaking out even further, what can the average family do to kind of prepare for harder times should they come?
Well, I think you want to have a year's supply of food storage, also, medications, prescriptions, the maximum extent. Water, you want to have a lot of water storage, or else live by a lake or something like that. But obviously, ammo, guns and ammo are important as well. And you want to kind of paraphrase a popular term, you want to get right with Jesus. You want to, draw closer to God, because ultimately you can have all the preparations, the physical preparations of the world, but if you're not spiritually prepared, you might not survive what's coming. So that would be my advice and recommendations to your viewers is to keep the commandments, draw closer to the Savior, and just help your family do the same. And that's really the greatest insurance that I see to tribulations that might be ahead.
Awesome. Well, David, as always, I appreciate you coming on, man. When this sort of stuff breaks out, you're my go-to. You break it down in a way that even a guy like me can understand, and that's impressive. So put that on your resume. You were able to talk down to Dave Sanders and get him all squared away. So that's worth something. Let's just stay in touch, and as we'll plan on touching here, maybe latter part of this year, unless something really breaks. But other than that, man, I really appreciate you being on.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot for inviting me on your show.
All right, thanks. Bye, everybody. Hang out for just 5 minutes there, Dave.
Listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.